Imagine an era when democracy flourished aboard pirate ships while tyranny ruled the civilized world, when outlaws created societies more equal than any European kingdom, and when a handful of desperate men could challenge the mightiest empires on earth. The Golden Age of Piracy, spanning roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, witnessed the rise and fall of history's most romanticized criminals, transforming the Caribbean into a theater where freedom, violence, wealth, and death collided in spectacular fashion. This wasn't the fantasy piracy of Hollywood films, but something far more complex and fascinating, a revolutionary social experiment conducted at the edge of empire, where men escaped the brutal hierarchies of European society to create their own radical alternatives. The middle of the 17th century marked a pivotal transformation in maritime power across the Atlantic world. Spain's once invincible naval supremacy, which had dominated the seas for over a century, began showing cracks that would eventually become gaping wounds in the empire's ability to protect its vast colonial trade networks. The Treaty of the Pyrenees, signed between Spain and France on November 7, 1659, represented more than just the end of the Franco-Spanish War. It signaled the beginning of Spain's gradual retreat from its position as Europe's preeminent naval force. The financial drain of prolonged European conflicts had severely weakened the Spanish treasury, leaving fewer resources available for maintaining the extensive naval patrols necessary to protect the treasure fleets and merchant vessels that carried the wealth of the New World back to Europe. Spanish galleons, once the terror of any vessel that dared challenge their passage, now sailed with reduced escorts and increasingly outdated armaments. The famous plate fleets that had transported Peruvian silver and Mexican gold for generations found themselves vulnerable to attack as never before. Naval commanders in Havana and Cartagena reported to Madrid that they lacked sufficient warships to patrol the countless coves, inlets, and channels where hostile vessels could lie in wait. The age of opportunity was dawning. This weakness in Spanish maritime defense created an opportunity that rival European powers were quick to exploit. The Caribbean, previously dominated by Spanish colonial settlements and trade routes, suddenly became a theater where English, French, and Dutch interests could challenge Iberian supremacy with impunity. The transformation was most dramatically visible in the rise of buccaneering, a form of state-sanctioned piracy that would lay the groundwork for the Golden Age that followed. Tortuga, a small island off the northwest coast of Hispaniola, emerged as the first major buccaneer stronghold during this period. Originally settled by French colonists who had been driven from neighboring Hispaniola by Spanish forces, Tortuga's rocky coastline and natural harbors provided ideal refuge for vessels seeking to avoid Spanish patrols. The island's governors, appointed by the French West India Company, actively encouraged attacks on Spanish shipping by issuing letters of marque to anyone willing to harass Spanish colonial interests. The buccaneers who gathered on Tortuga represented a diverse collection of nationalities and backgrounds that would define pirate culture for generations. French hunters who had previously lived on Hispaniola, killing wild cattle and pigs for their hides, formed the core of many early buccaneer crews. These men, known as boucaniers for their method of smoking meat on wooden frames called boucans, possessed intimate knowledge of Caribbean waters and Spanish colonial settlements. English sailors who had served in Cromwell's navy brought naval expertise and familiarity with ship-to-ship combat, while Dutch merchants contributed knowledge of trade routes and markets for captured goods. A new way of life was taking shape. The buccaneer community on Tortuga operated under a loose confederation of captains who elected their own leaders and divided profits according to established articles. These early pirate codes, which would later influence the democratic practices of Golden Age piracy, established principles of shared risk and reward that attracted men dissatisfied with the rigid hierarchies of European naval and merchant service. A successful raid might net an ordinary buccaneer more money than he could earn in years of legitimate employment, creating a powerful incentive for continued participation in these quasi-legal ventures. Jamaica's transformation from Spanish colony to English stronghold in 1655 provided buccaneers with an even more significant base of operations. When Admiral William Penn and General Robert Venables captured the island for England during the Western Design Campaign, they inherited a strategic position that commanded the Windward Passage, one of the most important shipping lanes in the Caribbean. The English colonial government, recognizing the value of buccaneers in defending the island against Spanish counterattacks, actively recruited pirates and privateers to Port Royal. Port Royal's natural harbour could accommodate vessels of any size, while its position at the mouth of Kingston Harbour provided easy access to both the open Caribbean and the protected waters of the harbour itself. The town that grew up around this strategic anchorage quickly developed a reputation for lawlessness and excess that would earn it the sobriquet the wickedest city on earth. Taverns, brothels, and gaming houses lined the narrow streets catering to buccaneers who arrived with Spanish gold burning holes in their pockets. But what drove men to this dangerous life? The economic incentives that drove men to buccaneering and piracy during this period reflected broader social and economic disruptions throughout the Atlantic world. The end of major European conflicts left thousands of experienced sailors unemployed, their skills suddenly worthless in peacetime economies that had little use for men trained in naval warfare. The English Civil War and its aftermath had displaced numerous seamen who found themselves without prospects for legitimate employment, while the conclusion of various continental wars left French and Dutch sailors seeking alternative means of survival. Conditions aboard legitimate merchant vessels provided additional motivation for men to turn to piracy. Merchant captains, operating under intense pressure to maximize profits, often treated their crews with brutal severity. Sailors endured inadequate food, cramped quarters, and harsh discipline while receiving wages that barely covered their most basic needs. Naval service offered little improvement, with press gangs forcibly recruiting men into service where flogging, keel-hauling, and other savage punishments awaited those who challenged authority. The rigid class structure of European society offered few opportunities for advancement to men of humble birth. A common sailor might spend decades at sea without ever rising above his station, regardless of his skill or courage. Piracy, by contrast, operated on more egalitarian principles, where ability and daring could elevate a man from the lowest position to command of his own vessel. The democratic election of pirate captains and the equitable distribution of booty according to predetermined shares created a social mobility that was virtually impossible to achieve through legitimate means. Henry Morgan would prove just how high a buccaneer could rise. Henry Morgan emerged as perhaps the most famous of the buccaneers, demonstrating that success in this brutal world could lead to wealth, power, and even respectability. Born in Wales around 1635, Morgan arrived in the Caribbean as a young man and quickly distinguished himself through his tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. His raids against Spanish settlements in Cuba, Panama, and throughout Central America netted enormous wealth while establishing him as the preeminent buccaneer commander of his generation. His 1671 sack of Panama City, despite occurring after peace had been declared between England and Spain, yielded treasures worth hundreds of thousands of pieces of eight, while demonstrating the vulnerability of even the most important Spanish colonial cities. The transformation of Port Royal into a major pirate haven proceeded rapidly under English colonial administration. Governor Thomas Modiford, appointed in 1664, actively encouraged buccaneering activities as a means of defending Jamaica against Spanish attack, while simultaneously enriching the colonial treasury through taxation of pirate profits. Port Royal's merchants quickly recognized the economic opportunities presented by the buccaneer trade. Ships arriving with captured Spanish goods needed to sell their prizes quickly, often at below-market prices, creating opportunities for substantial profits. The physical transformation of Port Royal reflected its growing importance as a pirate haven. Warehouses expanded to accommodate increasing volumes of captured goods, shipyards developed the capacity to repair and modify vessels, and gunsmiths, carpenters, sailmakers, and other craftsmen established shops catering to the specialized needs of pirate crews. The town's population swelled with adventurers, merchants, craftsmen, and camp followers drawn by the promise of easy money. But the buccaneer era was about to undergo a dramatic transformation. And the decade of the 1690s witnessed a fundamental transformation in Caribbean piracy, as the organized buccaneering communities that had flourished under colonial patronage began fragmenting into independent enterprises operating beyond the reach of any legitimate authority. This evolution accelerated dramatically following the Treaty of Ryswick, signed on September 20, 1697, which brought an end to the War of the League of Augsburg and fundamentally altered the legal landscape that had previously sheltered privateering activities throughout the Caribbean. Under the terms negotiated at Ryswick, England, France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic agreed to mutual recognition of territorial claims in the Americas and established protocols for peaceful resolution of colonial disputes. More significantly for the future of piracy, the treaty required all signatory powers to revoke existing letters of marque and cease issuing new privateering commissions against former enemies. Colonial governors who had previously encouraged attacks on Spanish shipping suddenly found themselves obligated to suppress the very activities they had actively promoted for decades. Governor William Beeston of Jamaica faced an immediate crisis when news of the treaty reached Port Royal in late 1697. Hundreds of privateers who had operated under English commissions against French and Spanish targets suddenly found their legal protection withdrawn. These men, many of whom had spent years perfecting the arts of naval warfare and ship capture, possessed few marketable skills applicable to legitimate employment. Most successful pirates of this transitional period recognized that independence from colonial patronage offered greater long-term prospects than continued reliance on the shifting allegiances of European diplomacy. One man would prove this spectacularly. Henry. Every emerged as the most significant figure of this transitional period, demonstrating through his spectacular success that independent piracy could yield profits far exceeding anything achieved under colonial sponsorship. Every, whose real name may have been Henry Avery or Benjamin Bridgman, began his piratical career as first mate aboard the privateer Charles II. In May 1694, Avery led a mutiny against the ship's captain while anchored at Corunna, seizing control of the vessel and sailing for the Indian Ocean with a crew of approximately 85 men. Avery's decision to abandon the Caribbean for the Indian Ocean reflected sophisticated understanding of global trade patterns and the relative weakness of European naval forces in different regions. While the Caribbean had become increasingly patrolled by English, French, and Spanish warships, the Indian Ocean remained largely undefended beyond the immediate vicinity of major European trading posts. The annual pilgrim fleet that carried Muslim pilgrims from India to Mecca, along with the treasure ships of the Mughal Empire, presented targets far richer than anything available in Caribbean waters. The capture of the Ganges Sawai on September 7, 1695, near the entrance to the Red Sea, represented the most lucrative pirate raid in recorded history up to that point. The massive Mughal treasure ship, owned by the Grand Mughal Aurangzeb himself and carrying an estimated 600,000 rupees in gold and silver, along with precious stones and other valuables, fell to Avery's flotilla after a fierce battle lasting several hours. Each member of Avery's crew received a share worth approximately $1,000, equivalent to 20 years' wages for an ordinary seaman. Avery himself claimed a captain's portion worth an estimated $2,000 to $3,000, making him one of the wealthiest men in the Atlantic world. News of this capture would change everything. News of Every's success spread rapidly throughout the Caribbean and American colonies, carried by merchant vessels and transmitted through the informal networks that connected pirate communities across the Atlantic. The story grew with each telling, transforming Every from a successful pirate captain into a legendary figure whose exploits inspired countless sailors to abandon legitimate employment for the promise of similar riches. Recruiting for piratical expeditions became significantly easier as tavern keepers in Port Royal, Nassau, and other pirate havens recounted tales of Every's golden capture. The impact of Every's success extended far beyond its effect on pirate recruitment. The attack on the Ganges Sawai provoked a diplomatic crisis between the English East India Company and the Mughal Empire that threatened to disrupt the lucrative Asian trade upon which English merchants increasingly depended. Emperor Aurangzeb, outraged by the attack on his personal vessel and the reported mistreatment of Muslim pilgrims by Every's crew, threatened to expel all English traders from Mughal territories and seize East India Company assets in retaliation. The East India Company, facing potential losses worth millions of pounds, pressured the English government to issue the first substantial bounty for the capture of a pirate leader. A reward of $500 was offered for Every's capture, along with a royal pardon for any of his crew members who surrendered voluntarily. This marked the beginning of a more aggressive governmental response to piracy that would intensify throughout the following decade. Every himself successfully evaded capture, disappearing from historical records after reportedly settling on an island under an assumed identity. His successful escape enhanced his legendary status among potential pirates. But a new center of pirate power was rising. Madagascar's emergence as a major pirate stronghold during this period reflected both the global expansion of piratical activities and the strategic advantages offered by the island's geography and political situation. Located approximately 250 miles off the east coast of Africa, Madagascar commanded the sea routes connecting Europe with Asia, while remaining largely beyond the reach of European colonial authorities. The island's native kingdoms proved willing to accommodate pirate settlements in exchange for manufactured goods and military assistance. The northeastern coast of Madagascar, particularly the area around Ile Sainte-Marie, offered numerous advantages for pirate operations. The island's natural harbors could accommodate vessels of any size while providing protection from both storms and hostile warships. Dense tropical forests supplied timber for ship repairs and construction, while abundant freshwater streams and fertile soil supported permanent settlements. Most importantly, the absence of European military forces meant that pirates could establish bases without fear of sudden attack by colonial authorities. Adam Baldridge, an English pirate who established a settlement on Ile Sainte-Marie around 1691, demonstrated the potential for creating permanent pirate communities that could support extended operations in the Indian Ocean. Baldridge's settlement included warehouses for storing captured goods, workshops for ship maintenance, and residential quarters for pirates and their families. The community maintained diplomatic relations with local Malagasy rulers while serving as a supply depot and communications hub for pirate crews operating throughout the Indian Ocean. Thomas Tew would prove the pirate round could yield incredible riches. Thomas Tew pioneered the systematic exploitation of Indian Ocean opportunities through his establishment of a reliable route that connected American colonial ports with the pirate strongholds developing along the coast of Madagascar. Operating from Newport, Rhode Island, Tew departed American waters in late 1692 with a crew of 60 men aboard the sloop Amity. His ostensible mission involved attacking French settlements along the West African coast, but Tew had already determined to pursue the far more lucrative opportunities available in the Indian Ocean. Tew's successful return to Newport in April 1694 created a sensation throughout the American colonies, as word spread of his crew's extraordinary wealth and their tales of adventure in exotic lands. The pirates' conspicuous spending in colonial ports provided tangible evidence of the profits available through Indian Ocean operations, while their stories of weakly defended treasure ships and friendly native rulers encouraged others to attempt similar ventures. Colonial merchants recognized new opportunities for investment in piratical expeditions that promised returns far exceeding those available through legitimate trade. The expansion of American participation in Indian Ocean piracy accelerated rapidly following Tew's demonstration of its profitability. Frederick Phillips, a wealthy New York merchant, invested heavily in piratical expeditions while maintaining his respectable position in colonial society. His ships carried supplies to Madagascar and returned with Asian goods that were sold in American markets at enormous profits. These arrangements created complex financial relationships that blurred the boundaries between legitimate commerce and piratical enterprise. But back in the Caribbean, a new pirate republic was being born. Nassau's transformation into the Caribbean's premier pirate stronghold resulted from a unique combination of geographical advantages and governmental weakness that created ideal conditions for establishing an autonomous pirate community. New Providence Island, where Nassau was situated, occupied a strategic position at the northeastern edge of the Bahama Islands, commanding the Windward Passage and the Straits of Florida, through which Spanish treasure ships and merchant vessels were obliged to pass when traveling between the Caribbean and Europe. The harbor at Nassau offered exceptional advantages for piratical operations while presenting significant obstacles to potential attackers. The entrance to the harbor was protected by a sandbar that prevented large warships from approaching the town while allowing the shallow draft sloops and brigantines favored by pirates to pass freely. Once inside the harbor, vessels could anchor in protected waters surrounded by numerous small coves and inlets that provided additional security and multiple escape routes in case of attack. The collapse of effective English colonial administration in the Bahamas created a power vacuum that pirates were quick to exploit. The islands had been devastated by combined French and Spanish attacks in 1703 and 1706, which destroyed most of the colonial infrastructure and scattered the English population. The death of Governor George Hasket in 1706 left the colony without effective leadership, as subsequent gubernatorial appointments either failed to reach the islands or proved incapable of asserting control over the increasingly lawless population. The absence of governmental authority meant that Nassau lacked the basic institutions necessary for maintaining civil order. Into this vacuum stepped an extraordinary leader. Benjamin Hornigold emerged as the dominant figure in Nassau's pirate community during the early years of its development as a pirate stronghold. Hornigold, an English sailor who had operated as a privateer during the War of Spanish Succession, possessed the experience, connections, and leadership abilities necessary to organize the diverse collection of pirates, refugees, and adventurers who had gathered on New Providence Island. Under his leadership, the pirates of Nassau developed what contemporary observers described as the Flying Gang, a loose confederation of pirate crews that operated under common principles while maintaining individual autonomy. The Flying Gang was not a formal organization with written bylaws or permanent structure, but rather an informal alliance based on mutual benefit and shared opposition to governmental authority. Crews could join or leave the alliance as circumstances dictated, but while participating, they agreed to abide by certain common practices and provide mutual assistance when required. The governance structure that evolved within the Flying Gang reflected the democratic principles that had characterized pirate communities since the buccaneer era, but with greater sophistication and formalization. Major decisions affecting the entire pirate community were made through assemblies where each crew's representatives could voice their opinions and cast votes. These gatherings, typically held on the beach outside Nassau, resembled town meetings more than military councils, with extensive debate preceding any significant resolutions. Hornigold's role within this democratic framework was that of a first among equals rather than an absolute commander. While his experience and success earned him considerable influence, his authority depended on the continued support of other captains and their crews. A unique culture was flourishing in Nassau. The economic system that developed in Pirate Nassau operated on principles fundamentally different from those governing legitimate colonial economies. Rather than being based on agricultural production or manufacturing, Nassau's economy centered on the redistribution of wealth captured from Spanish and other merchant vessels. Pirates would arrive in port with holds full of captured goods, ranging from silver coins and precious stones to manufactured items and exotic commodities, which they would then exchange for supplies, services, and entertainment. The disposal of captured goods required the development of sophisticated commercial networks that could handle large quantities of valuable merchandise without attracting unwanted attention from colonial authorities. Jewish merchants, building on commercial relationships established during the buccaneering era, played crucial roles in these networks by providing connections to legitimate markets throughout the Caribbean and North American colonies. Local traders and provisioners quickly recognized the economic opportunities presented by the steady influx of wealthy pirates seeking to exchange their captured treasures for immediate necessities and pleasures. Women played significant roles in Nassau's pirate economy, though their contributions were often overlooked by contemporary chroniclers focused on the more dramatic aspects of piratical activities. Female tavern keepers and merchants accumulated considerable wealth by catering to the needs of visiting pirates, while others invested directly in piratical ventures as silent partners who provided financial backing in exchange for shares of the profits. Some women accompanied pirate cruises as partners or wives, participating in expeditions and sharing in the dangers and rewards of piratical life. But the Golden Age was about to reach its zenith. The period between 1715 and 1720 witnessed the emergence of the most sophisticated and profitable pirate operations in Caribbean history. The conclusion of the War of Spanish Succession through the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, followed by the Treaty of Rastatt in 1714, created a massive displacement of maritime labor that would fundamentally reshape the landscape of Caribbean piracy. Over 40,000 privateers who had operated under legitimate commissions from various European powers suddenly found their legal authorization revoked and their specialized skills rendered worthless in peacetime economies. The demographic composition of this displaced maritime workforce proved particularly volatile. Most privateers were young men in their 20s and 30s who had spent their formative years engaged in legalized violence and accustomed to the democratic governance structures common aboard privateer vessels. They possessed extensive knowledge of Caribbean waters, familiarity with the latest naval tactics, and networks of contacts throughout the region's ports. More significantly, they had grown accustomed to the substantial profits possible through ship capture and had little patience for the meager wages offered by legitimate employment. Henry Jennings demonstrated the spectacular rewards available to pirates willing to invest the resources and manpower necessary to challenge heavily defended targets. Operating with a flotilla of 3 sloops and approximately 300 men in 1715, Jennings attacked the Spanish salvage camp recovering silver from wrecked treasure ships off the Florida coast, overwhelming the guards and seizing silver worth an estimated 350,000 pieces of 8. This single operation netted each of Jennings's men profits equivalent to several years' wages in legitimate employment, but even greater legends were being forged. Edward Teach emerged from the ranks of Benjamin Hornigold's crew in late 1716 to become the most feared pirate captain in the Western Hemisphere through a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare and strategic positioning. Teach, whose origins remain obscured by conflicting contemporary accounts, possessed the physical presence and tactical acumen necessary to command respect among the hardened criminals and former naval personnel who comprised Nassau's pirate population. Standing well over 6 feet tall with a massive black beard that he wove with hemp and slow-burning matches during combat, Teach cultivated an appearance calculated to strike terror into the hearts of his victims before any shots were fired. The transformation of Edward Teach into Blackbeard represented a masterful exercise in personal branding that preceded modern advertising techniques by centuries. Teach understood that his reputation for ferocity and unpredictability could accomplish more than superior firepower in persuading merchant crews to surrender without resistance. He deliberately fostered stories about his supernatural origins and demonic powers, encouraging crew members to spread tales of his ability to survive wounds that would kill ordinary men and his practice of drinking rum mixed with gunpowder to demonstrate his inhuman constitution. Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, served as both a formidable weapon of war and a floating stage for theatrical displays designed to enhance his fearsome reputation. The vessel, originally a French slave ship named La Concorde that Teach had captured near St. Vincent in November 1717, measured approximately 200 feet in length and displaced over 300 tons. Teach's modifications transformed the ship into one of the most heavily armed pirate vessels ever recorded, mounting 40 cannons of various calibers. His most audacious operation would shock the colonies. The Charleston blockade executed in May 1718 represented the pinnacle of Blackbeard's career and the most brazen assertion of pirate authority over colonial trade ever attempted. Teach positioned his squadron outside Charleston Harbor and systematically captured every vessel attempting to enter or leave the port, including the pilot boat that guided ships through the treacherous sandbars protecting the harbor entrance. Within days, Teach had accumulated a collection of prominent Charleston citizens as hostages, including Samuel Wragg, a member of the Colonial Council, and his 4-year-old son. The audacity of holding an entire colonial port hostage while making specific demands for medical supplies revealed both Teach's strategic sophistication and his understanding of colonial vulnerabilities. Charleston's merchants and officials found themselves powerless to resist his demands, as the colonial government lacked naval forces capable of challenging Teach's squadron. The successful completion of the blockade after receiving the requested medical chest demonstrated to colonial authorities throughout North America that pirates possessed the capability to disrupt commerce whenever they chose to concentrate their forces effectively. Teach's relationship with North Carolina officials illuminated the complex web of corruption and accommodation that enabled pirate operations throughout the colonial period. Governor Charles Eden and his secretary and collector of customs, Tobias Knight, maintained such close relationships with Blackbeard that contemporary observers accused them of serving as partners in his enterprises. Bathtown, North Carolina's colonial capital, became Blackbeard's primary base of operations during the final phase of his career. But his days were numbered. Lieutenant Robert Maynard's pursuit of Edward Teach represented the most dramatic and successful naval expedition against the pirates, combining careful intelligence gathering with tactical innovation to eliminate the most feared pirate captain of his generation. Maynard's command of 2 small sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, reflected the recognition that hunting pirates required vessels capable of operating in the shallow waters where pirates typically sought refuge. The shallow drafts and maneuverability of these vessels provided crucial advantages in the confined waters of Ocracoke Inlet, where Teach had established his final stronghold. The battle that occurred in Ocracoke Inlet on November 22, 1718, demonstrated both the tactical skills that had made Teach such a formidable opponent and the advantages that superior numbers and preparation could provide to well-led governmental forces. The hand-to-hand combat that decided the battle illustrated the personal courage required of naval officers who accepted assignments to hunt dangerous pirates in their own territory. Maynard's direct confrontation with Teach involved sword fighting and pistol dueling at close quarters, with both men suffering wounds before Teach finally succumbed to multiple injuries. The death of Blackbeard in single combat with a Royal Navy officer provided a powerful symbol of governmental determination to eliminate pirate threats, regardless of the personal risks involved. The decision to sever Teach's head and display it from the bowsprit of Maynard's vessel served both as proof of the pirate's death and as a warning to other criminals who might consider similar careers. This gruesome trophy became a powerful symbol throughout the Caribbean of the government's capability to eliminate even the most notorious pirates. But another legendary captain had already written his name in history. Samuel Bellamy's rise to prominence followed a different trajectory from Blackbeard's theatrical approach, emphasizing egalitarian principles and democratic governance that attracted followers through ideological appeal rather than fear. Bellamy, known to his contemporaries as Black Sam for his preference for black clothing rather than the gaudy attire favored by many pirate captains, had served as a crew member under Benjamin Hornigold before establishing himself as an independent commander in 1716. Bellamy's capture of the Wider Galley in February 1717 represented both the pinnacle of his success and a demonstration of the sophisticated tactics employed by the most skilled pirate commanders of the period. The Wider, a three-masted galley ship measuring 102 feet in length and displacing 300 tons, had been constructed specifically for the African slave trade. The vessel's recent completion of a successful slaving voyage from West Africa to Jamaica meant that its hold contained not only the profits from the sale of enslaved persons, but also a cargo of sugar, indigo, and other valuable commodities destined for London markets. The transformation of the Wider from slave ship to pirate flagship required extensive modifications that reflected Bellamy's understanding of the specialized requirements for piratical operations. Additional gun ports were cut into the vessel's sides to accommodate the 28 cannons that Bellamy eventually mounted, while internal bulkheads were removed to create more space for his crew of 146 men. Bellamy's political philosophy, as recorded in contemporary accounts of his speeches to captured crews, articulated a coherent critique of existing social and economic hierarchies. But tragedy would strike suddenly. The tragic destruction of the Wider off Cape Cod on April 26, 1717, eliminated one of the most successful pirate operations of the Golden Age, while providing modern archaeologists with unprecedented insights into the material culture of early 18th century piracy. The storm that drove Bellamy's flagship onto the shores near Wellfleet occurred as the pirates were returning to their base after a successful cruise. The loss of the ship and most of its crew, including Bellamy himself, demonstrated the constant dangers faced by pirates operating in unfamiliar waters. The wreck of the Wider preserved a remarkable collection of artifacts that illuminated aspects of pirate life rarely documented in contemporary written sources. Archaeological excavations have recovered thousands of coins from throughout the Atlantic world, demonstrating the international scope of pirate operations and the diverse sources of their wealth. Personal belongings recovered from the wreck site revealed the extent to which successful pirates could afford luxury items, including fine jewelry, expensive weapons, and exotic commodities. While Bellamy's career ended in tragedy, another captain was about to embark on the most systematically destructive piratical campaign in history. Bartholomew Roberts would emerge as the most successful pirate commander of the Golden Age through his methodical approach to maritime warfare and his innovative organizational techniques. Roberts, a Welsh sailor who had served aboard legitimate merchant vessels before turning to piracy in 1719, possessed the analytical mind and administrative skills necessary to transform piratical activities from opportunistic raids into carefully planned campaigns that maximized profits while minimizing risks. His journey to infamy was about to begin. Bartholomew Roberts's entry into piracy resulted from circumstances beyond his control when the slave ship Princess, on which he served as third mate, was captured by Howell Davis near the Gold Coast of West Africa in June 1719. Davis, recognizing Roberts's navigational skills and leadership potential, offered him the choice between joining the pirate crew or facing marooning on the African coast. The assassination of Howell Davis during a failed attack on the Portuguese fortress at Principe in July 1719 created an unexpected opportunity for Roberts to demonstrate his leadership capabilities. The democratic election that followed Davis's death resulted in Roberts's selection as captain despite his relatively brief experience as a pirate. Roberts's systematic approach to piracy began with his development of comprehensive intelligence networks that provided detailed information about merchant shipping patterns, naval patrol schedules, and the defensive capabilities of potential targets. These networks extended throughout the Atlantic world, connecting informants in European ports with agents in American and African coastal settlements. The quality of intelligence available to Roberts often exceeded that possessed by legitimate naval commanders, enabling him to position his forces advantageously while avoiding confrontations with superior enemy forces. Roberts's fleet reached its maximum size in 1721 when he commanded 4 major vessels with a combined crew of nearly 500 men, making him the admiral of the largest pirate force ever assembled. The flagship Royal Fortune, a former French frigate mounting 40 guns, served as the command center for operations that extended from the Caribbean to the coast of West Africa. The coordination required to maintain such a large force presented unprecedented logistical challenges that Roberts addressed through innovations in supply management and crew administration. His reign of terror was reaching its peak. Roberts's final campaigns along the West African coast between 1720 and 1722 represented the apex of piratical achievement as his fleet systematically devastated the slave trade and legitimate commerce throughout the region. His attack on the slave ship Onslow in June 1721 demonstrated the tactical sophistication that distinguished his operations from those of conventional pirates. The Onslow, a heavily armed vessel mounting 28 guns and carrying a crew of 70 men, represented one of the most formidable opponents that any pirate captain had ever attempted to capture. The capture of 11 slave ships at Cape Coast Castle in January 1722 represented perhaps the most audacious single operation ever attempted by a pirate fleet. Roberts's assault on the heavily fortified British trading post required precise timing and coordination between his vessels as they approached the anchorage, where the slave ships lay at anchor under the protection of the castle's guns. Destruction of property worth over $50,000 in a single day demonstrated the continuing vulnerability of European colonial commerce to determined pirate attacks. Roberts's organizational innovations extended beyond tactical coordination to encompass comprehensive systems for crew management and fleet administration that enabled him to maintain discipline and effectiveness among nearly 500 men operating across multiple vessels. His articles of agreement established detailed procedures for profit distribution, disciplinary enforcement, and command succession that prevented the internal conflicts that had destroyed other large pirate confederations. The democratic principles embedded in these articles attracted skilled mariners who valued equitable treatment while ensuring that Roberts retained the authority necessary for effective military command. But his end was approaching. The death of Bartholomew Roberts on February 10, 1722, during the battle with HMS Swallow off Cape Lopez, marked the end of the Golden Age of Piracy as definitively as any single event could. Captain Challoner Ogle's pursuit of Roberts's fleet represented the culmination of years of planning by Royal Navy commanders who recognized that eliminating Roberts was essential for restoring security to West African shipping lanes. The Swallow, a fourth-rate ship of the line mounting 50 guns, possessed the firepower necessary to challenge Roberts's flagship in direct combat. The grape shot that killed Roberts as he stood on his quarterdeck directing the battle struck him in the throat, causing immediate death and creating panic among his crew, who had never contemplated the possibility of their seemingly invincible captain's mortality. Roberts's body, dressed in his finest crimson damask waistcoat and red feather, was immediately thrown overboard according to his own instructions to prevent its capture by enemy forces. This final gesture reflected both his pride and his understanding of the symbolic importance that his death would hold for governmental authorities. The trials that began at Cape Coast Castle in March 1722 under the jurisdiction of a special admiralty court represented the largest piracy prosecution in colonial history. The proceedings involved detailed testimony from captured pirates, examination of evidence recovered from Roberts's vessels, and complex legal arguments about the jurisdiction of colonial courts over crimes committed in international waters. The execution of 54 pirates from Roberts's crew between April and November 1722 provided a dramatic demonstration of governmental power that reverberated throughout the Atlantic world. But piracy's story included unexpected players. The maritime world of the early 18th century operated under rigid assumptions about gender roles that relegated women to supporting positions within coastal communities while explicitly excluding them from the dangerous and lucrative business of seafaring. Yet within the anarchic realm of Caribbean piracy, where traditional social hierarchies faced constant challenge and individual capability often mattered more than conventional propriety, exceptional women found opportunities to transcend these limitations and participate directly in the violent enterprise of maritime robbery. Anne Bonny emerged from the complex social landscape of colonial Carolina as perhaps the most notorious female pirate of the Golden Age. Born Anne Cormack around 1697 in County Cork, Ireland, she was the illegitimate daughter of William Cormack, a successful lawyer whose affair with his housemaid created a scandal that ultimately forced the family to immigrate to the American colonies. Her violent rejection of her father's matrimonial plans demonstrated the fierce independence that would later serve her well in the dangerous world of piracy. Anne's marriage to James Bonny, a small-time sailor and occasional pirate, represented both an act of rebellion against her father's authority and a strategic alliance with someone who could provide access to the maritime networks that fascinated her. The couple's arrival in Nassau around 1718 coincided with the Pirate Republic's golden period. Anne's relationship with John Calico Jack Rackham began as a typical liaison between a pirate captain and a local woman, but evolved into a genuine partnership that challenged conventional assumptions about women's capabilities in maritime warfare. Another extraordinary woman would join them. Mary Reard's extraordinary life trajectory illustrates even more dramatically the lengths to which some women went to escape the limitations imposed by their gender in 18th century society. Born in London around 1690 to a woman whose husband had died at sea, Mary's early childhood was shaped by economic desperation that forced her mother to devise elaborate deceptions to secure financial support. The decision to disguise Mary as her dead brother allowed the family to continue receiving support payments while establishing a pattern of gender deception that would define Mary's entire adult life. Mary's enlistment in the English Army during the War of Succession provided her with military training and combat experience that few women of her generation possessed. Serving as a foot soldier in Flanders, she participated in several major battles and demonstrated the physical courage and tactical competence that earned respect from her male colleagues. Her ability to maintain her masculine disguise while enduring the harsh conditions of military campaigning testified to both her determination and her skill at gender performance. The capture of Mary's merchant vessel by pirates operating from Nassau presented her with an unexpected opportunity to join a community where her military experience and maritime skills would be valued regardless of her biological sex. Her decision to volunteer for pirate service reflected both her attraction to the adventurous life that piracy offered and her recognition that piratical society provided more opportunities for individual advancement than legitimate employment. The convergence of Anne Bonny and Mary Read aboard Rackham's sloop created an unprecedented situation. The partnership that developed between Anne and Mary represented a unique alliance that combined their different approaches to challenging gender restrictions with their shared commitment to the piratical life. Anne's open defiance of feminine conventions complemented Mary's complete adoption of masculine identity, creating a formidable team that could adapt their strategies to different tactical situations. Their collaboration demonstrated the potential for women to support each other in transcending traditional limitations while pursuing dangerous and unconventional careers. When colonial authorities captured Rackham's crew in Jamaican waters in October 1720, they found themselves confronting legal questions that had no clear precedent in maritime law. The prosecution of Anne Bonny and Mary Read required courts to determine whether women could be held equally accountable with men for piratical crimes and whether their gender provided any mitigating circumstances that should influence their sentences. The trial proceedings that began in Spanish Town, Jamaica, on November 16, 1720, attracted enormous public attention throughout the Caribbean. Both Anne and Mary claimed to be pregnant when sentence was pronounced, a development that created additional legal complications while potentially saving their lives. The court's decision to postpone their executions pending verification of their conditions illustrated the complex intersection of gender, law, and medical knowledge in colonial judicial proceedings. Read's death in prison before her pregnancy could be verified eliminated one source of legal uncertainty, while Anne Bonny's mysterious disappearance from historical records has generated centuries of speculation about her ultimate fate. Meanwhile, the final chapter was unfolding. The escalating audacity of pirate operations throughout the Caribbean had by 1716 reached levels that threatened the fundamental economic structures upon which European colonial empires depended. The systematic disruption of trade routes, the establishment of autonomous pirate republics, and the growing international incidents caused by attacks on vessels from multiple nations created pressures that forced metropolitan governments to abandon their previous tolerance for maritime lawlessness. The appointment of Woodes Rogers as governor of the Bahamas in January 1718 represented the culmination of years of planning by English colonial administrators who recognized that conventional approaches to piracy suppression had proven inadequate. Rogers, a former privateer captain who had gained fame through his circumnavigation of the globe between 1708 and 1711, possessed both the maritime expertise necessary to understand pirate tactics and the political connections required to secure the substantial resources needed for a comprehensive campaign against the pirate stronghold. Rogers's fleet, consisting of 3 warships and several supply vessels, carrying a total force of over 100 soldiers and 250 colonists, represented the largest military expedition ever mounted against a pirate stronghold. Rogers's arrival at Nassau on July 26, 1718, created an immediate crisis for the pirate community as hundreds of pirates found themselves confronted with the choice between submission to governmental authority or resistance that would likely result in their destruction. The sight of Rogers's fleet entering Nassau Harbour demonstrated both the government's capability to project military power into previously secure pirate territories and its determination to eliminate pirate operations. The royal pardon offered one path forward. The King's pardon, proclaimed by George I on September 5, 1717, and implemented by Rogers upon his arrival in Nassau, represented an unprecedented attempt to resolve the piracy crisis through negotiation rather than military force alone. The terms of the pardon offered complete forgiveness for all piratical acts committed before January 5, 1718, in exchange for the surrender of pirate vessels and the acceptance of governmental authority. This policy reflected the recognition that military action alone could not address the scale of the piracy problem. The mixed success of the pardon policy reflected the diverse motivations and circumstances of individual pirates who faced the choice between surrender and continued resistance. Approximately 300 pirates accepted the terms of the pardon during Rogers's first months as governor, representing a significant portion of the Nassau-based pirate population. Benjamin Hornigold's acceptance of the royal pardon and his subsequent employment as a pirate hunter illustrated the potential for successful rehabilitation of former pirates who possessed valuable skills and local knowledge. The resistance mounted by pirates who rejected the pardon offer revealed the limitations of negotiated solutions to the piracy problem. Edward Teach's continued operations from North Carolina bases, Charles Vane's attacks on shipping near Nassau, and the activities of other pirate leaders who refused to surrender created ongoing security threats that required military responses. The persistence of these holdout groups demonstrated that comprehensive piracy suppression would require sustained military pressure in addition to negotiated settlements. The systematic campaigns were beginning. The coordinated international efforts that emerged during this period represented unprecedented cooperation between European colonial powers that had traditionally viewed each other as rivals rather than allies. The recognition that piracy threatened the commercial interests of all European nations created incentives for collaboration that overcame traditional diplomatic obstacles. Spanish, French, English, and Dutch colonial administrators shared intelligence about pirate movements while coordinating naval patrols and supporting each other's anti-piracy operations. The expansion of Admiralty Court jurisdiction represented a crucial legal development that streamlined the prosecution of piracy cases while ensuring that trials would be conducted according to consistent legal standards throughout the colonial world. For the establishment of special admiralty courts in major colonial ports eliminated the need for expensive transportation of defendants to metropolitan centers while providing colonial officials with the legal authority necessary to process large numbers of piracy cases efficiently. The financial costs associated with comprehensive anti-piracy operations strained colonial budgets while demonstrating the economic impact that piracy had created through its disruption of legitimate commerce. The expenses involved in maintaining naval patrols, constructing fortifications, and prosecuting captured pirates required substantial investments by colonial governments. However, the restoration of secure shipping lanes and the resumption of normal commercial activities ultimately justified these expenditures through increased tax revenues and economic growth. The last great captains were falling. Edward Lowe's career between 1721 and 1724 exemplified both the continuing appeal of piratical life to certain types of individuals and the ultimate futility of attempting to maintain traditional pirate operations in the changed political environment of the 1720s. Lowe, whose background included service aboard legitimate merchant vessels, possessed the maritime skills necessary for successful pirate operations. However, his inability to establish secure bases or maintain large crews limited his effectiveness while exposing him to constant pursuit by governmental forces. Lowe's reputation for exceptional cruelty, including the torture and murder of captured merchants and sailors, reflected both his personal sadistic tendencies and his recognition that fear remained one of the few weapons available to pirates who lacked the numerical strength to overcome resistance through conventional means. The international manhunt that eventually eliminated Lowe and his associates demonstrated the extent to which governmental authorities had developed their capabilities for tracking and capturing individual pirates operating without organizational support. The decline of piracy as an attractive career option resulted from the combination of increased risks and decreased opportunities that characterized the maritime environment of the 1720s. The systematic elimination of pirate bases removed the secure retreats that had been essential for successful operations, while improved naval patrols made it increasingly difficult to locate and capture suitable prizes without detection. The establishment of regular convoy systems for valuable shipping further reduced the availability of isolated targets. The Golden Age was ending. The systematic elimination of the last independent pirate captains by 1730 created a power vacuum in former pirate strongholds that colonial administrators moved quickly to fill with legitimate governmental institutions and commercial enterprises. Nassau, which had served as the epicenter of Caribbean piracy for over a decade, underwent a remarkable transformation as Woodes Rogers and his successors implemented comprehensive programs to convert the lawless settlement into a productive colonial outpost. The harbor that had once sheltered hundreds of pirate vessels now accommodated merchant ships carrying legitimate cargo. The legacy of the Golden Age of Piracy thus encompassed both practical changes in maritime law enforcement and romantic mythologies that would influence popular culture for centuries. The systematic campaigns that had eliminated organized piracy created more secure conditions for legitimate commerce, while establishing legal and administrative precedents that strengthened colonial governance. Simultaneously, the dramatic personalities and democratic ideals of pirate communities provided source material for legends that celebrated individual freedom and resistance to authority. The Golden Age of Piracy had ended, but its influence on both practical governance and popular imagination would endure far beyond the deaths of the last pirate captains. The legal precedents established through piracy prosecutions, the international cooperation developed during anti-piracy campaigns, and the democratic principles demonstrated in pirate governance all contributed to the evolution of maritime law and colonial administration. The pirates themselves, Blackbeard with his flaming beard, Black Sam Bellamy with his egalitarian philosophy, Bartholomew Roberts with his systematic campaigns, and Anne Bonny and Mary Read challenging gender boundaries, became legendary figures whose stories continue to captivate imaginations worldwide. They were criminals and revolutionaries, terrorists and freedom fighters, villains and heroes whose complex legacy reminds us that history's greatest stories are rarely simple tales of good versus evil. If this epic journey through the Golden Age of Piracy captivated you, subscribe to Flow of History for more incredible stories of the rebels and revolutionaries who challenged empires and changed our world forever.